Come join us as we dive deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today, interviewing top technology leaders from around the world and sharing true cybercrime stories to raise awareness. From the creators of Vigilance, the newest global technology newsletter translating cyber news into business language we all understand. So please help us keep this going by subscribing for free to our YouTube channel and downloading our podcast episodes on Apple and Spotify so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show. Welcome everybody to Cybercrime Junkies. I'm your host, David Morrow. Hopefully I'm not frozen on the screen. I've had several technical problems this afternoon. We are joined in the studio today by the none other but the top security researcher on the planet, Jon DiMaggio. John, welcome, sir. We're very excited about having you. No, you're always welcome here, sir. And always, what's the seat in the motorcycle right next to it? The little guy? The sidecar. Right in the sidecar of my chopper is Mark Mosher with a little helmet on.
Oh, absolutely. Dave, this is going to be such a good episode. If you guys have not listened to the past episode with John on here, I encourage you to go onto YouTube, go download our podcast from Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get them. These segments are priceless. This is such good stuff. You will not believe it. Buckle up, lace up them Nikes. We're about to move fast and move quick.
First and foremost, for those that might have not seen your work, they may not have your book up on their bookshelf like I do, John, and you're welcome. I take check. I'm one of your biggest fans. So just explain everybody kind of what your role is there over at Analyst One.
Yeah, so my official title is I am the chief, I had to think for a second there, chief security strategist. And the reason I had to think about it is because at the end of the day, I consider myself to be a researcher, bad guy chaser, analyst, writer, sort of combined. But yeah, my job is basically to do research and to write about it. So I do a lot of direct engagements. I use fake personas. I try and get close to, these days, ransomware criminals, and I write about it. The first, I'd say, 14 years of my career were all spent on espionage, and the past 5 or 6 have all been ransomware. So that's funny how things change.
So that's phenomenal, and that is being an advocate against cybercrime is something that people don't always talk about when they think of cybersecurity. They think of cybersecurity.
No, I got to step in for a second. Ladies and gentlemen, he's selling himself short on this. Short of the cape in a big S on his chest, there are very few other people that are making a mark for the good guys in the betterment of our civilization when it comes to the internet and cybersecurity than Jon DiMaggio. So, sorry, I had to get that plug in there for you.
You guys are too good to me, but thank you. I really do appreciate that. But honestly, I mean, that is, one of the most rewarding parts of this job is I do feel like I make a difference with the work that I do and the results. It motivates me. And the long nights, last night, I'm in my writing phase right now. Last night I was up, it was like 1 a.m. and I was still going. And it's just, these are one of the things that motivate me as I do. I feel like it makes a difference with the work when I see the results.
It does. Hey, when the bad guys use your picture as their avatar, they know your name, man.
Right. They do. They definitely do.
That's exactly right. What Mark is referencing for the listeners and the viewers who may not know John or know the history, first of all, for context, right? Like 30, 40 years ago, Johnny, when we were growing up, there were 2 different worlds. Like even 20 years ago, there were 2 different worlds. There was our regular world, the physical world, right? And then there were people using computers for stuff. It was like an electronic almost copy of what was going on. Right. But if that broke down, we could still do everything, right? It really never interrupted daily operations. And that's really changed. Like our whole lives in one way or another is hosted. It's connected online somewhere. And so, in the real world, in the physical world, right, we have police, we've got the FBI, we've got police. We have somebody causes trouble, somebody rips you off, somebody steals from you, somebody breaks into your home. All of those things, we have places in our society in place, right? But here we are, people working remotely, people working from everywhere, from an airport, restaurant, cafe, and we all get online and there are
Mhm.
no police, right? When we get online, we actually enter like their world. We enter the same world that cyber criminals live on. And it's a daunting task. And to have people like you as an advocate against cybercrime going undercover and doing this, it's really needed. Now, I'm not to say that, and you know this better than we do, but the U.S. federal and even state law enforcement, there are elements that get online and flush out cyber criminals and things like that. But for the mass public, right, we aren't protected. And so we really look to a
Agree.
lot of people like you to kind of shine a light and on the dark web. And
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. It's funny when you talk about law enforcement doing it. What a lot of people don't get is I work for a small company. I don't. I mean, I have my laptop. I mean, I don't have fancy tools. I don't have a crazy security budget. I use open source tools, my laptop, and I try to get creative. But it makes you work harder for it.
we make it
You
look
work
good.
harder.
And that's our
Thank you.
goal in this podcast, because we don't have jack either. And we just make it look really, really shiny. That's the whole point.
Well, you guys do a good job.
That's kind of the whole point.
It-
So when you said you
right.
mentioned you worked for about 14 years in espionage, and your book, The Art of Cyber Warfare, which I do have on my shelf and which I read, which I proved to you when we first did this podcast, I had read it,
You did.
and it was really good
You
because
did.
part of it was kind of technical. Some of it was over my head, especially at that time. It was newer, and the other part was really interesting. It was all about like the story behind some of these breaches and the espionage.
That's the part I like the
Yeah,
most, writing it. Stories.
it's so
Yeah.
interesting. In what capacity did you used to work for the federal government? Did you work in private sector? What did you generally do? If you can't disclose it, just indicate
Yeah.
so. But we're just
No. I worked for. I was a SIGINT analyst. I worked for one of the intelligence agencies. So yeah, I did secret squirrel stuff. Honestly, my favorite part about doing that though was writing the
yeah,
reports. I've always enjoyed writing. The negative to that was like 5 people would get to read them,
right.
but I got to do cool things that I don't get to talk about. But it was a fun job. I enjoyed it. It got to a point where I was just ready for something else to change things up, which is why I joined the private sector. And I went to Symantec for 7 years. I worked on their attack investigation team, which most of the work we did was espionage related, and that's mainly what I did while I was there.
Interesting. And in the espionage aspect to cybersecurity always fascinates me. When we did a segment,
I missed
yeah, we
it.
did a
Yeah.
segment on the series of breaches several years ago. The Anthem breach, the Office of Personnel Management, the Equifax breach, the Marriott Starwood Hotels breaches, and those would have been. I wanted to ask you about those because I just never have, and those were all major breaches with vast amounts of data taken. And they had financial information, they had healthcare information, they had credit information, as well as like travel and everything. Um, if that were to be sold, like all these other breaches that we read about every day in the news on the dark web, it would have been worth a lot of money, wouldn't it?
It would, but it's actually a lot worse than that. So the first public report I ever wrote was for Symantec, and it was called the Black Vine Espionage Group, and it covered two of the breaches you just
Yep.
talked about, and that was Anthem and OPM. And at high level, what happened with that is that was a China-based nation-state, sponsored attacker, and they popped Anthem and they popped OPM. Let's think about this. Anthem, at the time anyway, provided a lot of the healthcare coverage for federal employees. OPM stores all the records and does all of the investigations and background work to get top secret and secret clearances. So when you combine those two together, you have a hell of a lot of great information on essentially everybody in America that works with classified information. So you can make lists for entry in the country, you can make target lists for further espionage, you can make blackmail, use data for blackmailing purposes. There's a lot of things. So in looking at that versus bad guys selling it, I think we would have been better off with bad guys selling it. Not that either of them would have been a good ending to that story, but for that one, I think a lot of people didn't know the big picture of what was actually happening with it from a public aspect.
Yeah, this happened. What was it, Mark? 9 years ago or so, I think.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
2014, 2015. So even then, we weren't seeing data breaches and cybercrime gangs in the news like we are today.
Right. Not like today.
Yeah, it wasn't as prolific then, obviously.
Yeah. And it was.
We're going to get to a point where there is no PII because everybody's information is going to be out there in one data dump or another.
Yeah.
Getting so crazy.
Yeah. Well, and that leads to another topic that I wanted to ask you about, but let's stay on the espionage piece. So what boggles my mind about these breaches is these are breaches that normally when LockBit or BlackCat or one of these gangs go and BlackCat, I meant to say, sorry. Yeah. When they go and they exfiltrate, fancy word for steal, when they steal a bunch of data, right? The first thing they do is they extort, they blackmail them. They say, pay X amount, millions of dollars by this date. Otherwise we're going to leak your data. And then they do, or they go to sell the data online. So that data has a value. Either, first of all, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the cybercrime gangs are first and foremost proud of their hit. Are they not? Like they are the first ones to be like, we did this, like a big bombing. This terrorist group says, yes, we did it. We take responsibility. Yeah. These guys are the first ones to do this. And what I found in those, when I was just researching, I started researching them raw, like without other people's filters. And I was like, how come no cybercrime gangs are like, my insight was no different than what you found, what others found, but I was finding it on my own. I'm like, why are no cybercrime gangs bragging about this? This is a massive hit.
Oh, for the Anthem.
Yeah, these are massive breaches. How is nobody taking claim to this? And then how come nobody sold it or demanded a ransom for it? Like there was none of that.
And still have it
for at least for the right. And it would be worth, from some of the reports I saw, you mentioned things, and there were some other reports. Even I saw some indictments later came down against like 4 or 5 Chinese nationals that were part of the Chinese military. And
always nice to see that you were right years later when
it exactly right. And they're there like, we just discovered this, and we're like, oh, they've been saying this for like 4 or 5 years. But it's interesting how politics work. But they say that would have been worth billions of dollars, like several hundreds of millions of dollars, and nobody wanted it. So it shows you the value of that data was even beyond financial, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was absolutely what they could do with it, how they could repurpose it to better suit the government of China's stance in different aspects in the world, but also from intelligence value, just to get a sort of step up on us. I mean, even I would never visit there just because of that breach alone, knowing that my information was in there and think that I had a clearance and who I worked for and everything else. I just wouldn't risk it. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that might be in that situation and don't even know it, because let's think about it. The U.S. government's pretty big these days, and everybody gets a clearance nowadays. So maybe not to a certain level, but my point is that there's a lot of people that don't necessarily realize that. I think when they travel, that the data that they think was protected, if they were in the government or military with clearance back at that time, that it's all out the window. Somebody else has access to it.
Well, yeah, and that sets him up to be, a target or compromised, right? Like that's a scary thought.
Agree. I mean, yeah, it's tough, man. Because in anywhere you travel nowadays, you have to, if you're in this line of work, you have to, worry about somebody in my hotel room. Is am I going to connect to the network? People think I'm crazy because I bring a firewall with me when I go on travel, and I directly VPN back into my house, which is another firewall, so that all my traffic is going from a point-to-point connection through my own network, and I do things like that. And but you have to be paranoid because people do crazy things, governments do crazy things. And when you see it every day, you can't just, be like, that'll never happen. They'll think of something you're not even thinking of. And you just don't want to end up a victim.
Yeah, and there was a lot of speculation about what the Chinese government or the Chinese military could do with that data. And it's they could do a lot of things. I mean, if this person in the federal government is at this level, they have access to this, they see this data that you want, right? Or they have this access, and their wife has cancer, their house is being foreclosed, they're traveling here, you could meet them, you could take care of all of their problems or a lot of their problems financially and turn them against the US. I mean, that was one aspect.
Yeah, I mean, and let's think about it. That's healthcare data. Let's say, it's something embarrassing.
Right.
Let's say somebody had an STD or something. They don't want that public, and you got some guy show up, at a restaurant or bar that you're at
with a full file of all your stuff.
If you don't want this being made available to all your friends and family.
People think that only happens in the movies. People think that only happens in the movies.
It doesn't.
But it doesn't.
It doesn't only.
No.
There's a reason that when you have a clearance, you get polygraphed and background checked, and that's because they're worried you're going to get blackmailed, and it's because things like this happen.
Which is why Mark is not cleared.
Yeah, I don't mind being compromised. My credit score is like a 7.
Yeah, and
so I don't know what
he's got clearance to hit the bourbon trail down in Kentucky. He's got clearance.
Well, I mean, I haven't been in that world now for a while, but yeah, I remember those days, and I'm happy to not have to deal with the headaches of polygraphs and all that other stuff. I mean, even if you don't have something to hide, they're just a pain in the ass to have somebody asking you all questions about your personal life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yep. So you brought up a really good point, and this is something I've been talking to a lot of people about, and that is there's so many data breaches, right? I used to go onto the site like, have I been pwned, right? And like maybe there was one, right? Now I go on the site, there's like 17, and I don't even know any of the apps. Right. So my data's been sold to this guy, to this guy, to this guy, and then they get breached. Right. I'm like, so much of our stuff is out there. To me, when selecting a company to work with, or selecting a lawyer to work with, or selecting a healthcare group, because it's still all commoditized, right? We can select who we do business with. And when doing it, it used to be, or it still is to a degree, but here's my question. At what point are we going to get to, we're not judging organizations by whether they've been breached, but we're judging them by how often they've been breached or how they handled the breach? Like, are we getting to that next evolution, do you think?
I definitely think how they handled the breach, even inadvertently, is something that's being looked at, because there are companies, there's some, I won't recall them out, but like in the volume 1 of the Ransomware Diaries, there's a big company that I called out because they sat there and lied, and they said that they weren't breached, and for like 3 months they said it, despite their name and data being posted on a data leak site by a threat actor. And then some of their customers were allegedly compromised because of that data being repurposed. And it's just I think that when the general public gets aware of those type of things happening in other companies, at least I would hope that would make a difference in if you want to work with them. At the end of the day, dollars do the talking, so maybe it doesn't. But I know from a consumer aspect, I definitely look at those things, and I won't give my business to those organizations, just even if they I wouldn't say handled it right, but something as small as like the sunglasses hub. I'm still upset that those bastards couldn't keep my information safe, and it's just my address. But you know what? My company spends a a lot of money to have my address removed from all those databases that are out there. And then I have somebody like that who from years ago that I give my address to, they couldn't keep it, and now that data is out on the dark web. And fortunately, it's not my current address, but it's just the point.
Well,
It's like,
it makes you want to buy
come on.
sunglasses elsewhere, right?
It does. It does. Yes, just yesterday, last night, I have a family member that called me, and they'd gotten a notification from their healthcare provider, and it was part of the CLOP,
Move it, breach,
it
yep.
was a activity, yeah. And the provider was not even, offering them
Credit
offering her
monitoring or anything?
any. Yeah, credit, nothing. And I'm just like, how is that okay? I get that that things happen, but how is it you're not? And I told her to call them, and she did, and they said, no, we're not going to do that. There was 9 million people involved, where we just can't, do something of that scope. Well, you know what? They sure wouldn't have my business moving
Right.
forward. I just think it's we need to hold these companies to a higher level of integrity, and I just think that I get it. Breaches happen, and anybody can be hacked, but like you just said, how you handle it makes a difference in your path forward and whether I give you my business.
Well, and I almost think it's going to get to, like, some people are talking about like a rating scale to some degree or some metric, because like when a breach happens, there's a difference between, okay, it's compromised, it's limited. Yes, this data was taken, but we were able to contain it after a certain part, and they were doing good things. They had certain measures in place, like they have an affirmative defense. They were doing things right, but like they have to be right 1,000 times. The criminals, it's an intervening criminal act.
Right.
If you think about the law and tort law, right? This is an intervening criminal act coming in to people that are doing best practices. You can blame the company to a degree, but not that much, because they were doing everything. So they handle it, they offer credit monitoring, and it goes away. Okay, that's fine. So I personally would still do business with that vendor or with them. Like, it's about risk. And so we still have to go with people that are taking risks seriously. But then there's breaches that are in the news that you're like, holy cow, they weren't doing anything. Like a business that has a ton of confidential information,
where they lied about it.
Yeah, they didn't have like regular money. They didn't have any SOC or any like SIM. Like they weren't looking at all for any anomalies. They didn't care. So they weren't investing whatsoever in the beginning. And then how do they handle it afterward? They lie about it. They don't disclose it. They wait till the last minute. Like, it's that to me is a sign that needs to be like that. A light needs to be shined on that, because that to me is, we don't want to do business with them. Like,
well, and there's another angle here that you're also not thinking of. And again, I won't name the companies, but this is all out in the public right now because this just happened.
Texas Emotion.
There was a threat actor who had stolen data from Company A. Company A was doing business with Company B. Well, Company C came in and bought that stolen data so that they could go to Company B and say, hey, I might have messed up my letters here, but the company you're doing business with that's supposed to be, assisting you and protecting you isn't doing that. I have this data that you were breached, and I have this data that was stolen from you. You should give us our business. And the reason that I have such an issue with that is, I get why people pay ransom payments. Companies pay ransom payments. That's sort of a necessity, like having to lose jobs, your customers' data, your livelihood. But when you're doing it for a business advantage and you're feeding that criminal ecosystem, I think there should be laws against that, and there's not. But I think that is extremely unethical. And there's a case that where it's been recently was talked about. But the fact is it happens a lot more than people realize.
So a company that wants to gain a competitive advantage will go and they'll pay the ransom essentially, or they'll buy the data.
They'll buy the stolen data.
They'll
buy the stolen data. Yeah.
Whoa, that is not something we have covered. That's really interesting.
Well, after the fact, I'll pass you the info, and you guys can do it as you like.
Yeah, that's a rabbit hole. That's an ugly side of it. Wow.
Yeah.
So that raises a question. There's talk now in the news and in government about outlawing ransom payments. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that could ever happen? Do you I don't know that it'll ever happen. Like they're talking about it in the next couple years, implementing something like that. I mean, first of all, you can't pay ransom to like a company or a cybercrime gang that would violate OFAC. Like they can't be on a like terrorist watch list or a country that is, you know, you can't make payments to North Korea, right? Like
Yeah.
you're not allowed to in the US.
Yeah. This is what'll happen if they do that. It'll, at face value, be extremely painful. There's companies that'll probably go out of business. There's a lot of people that'll lose jobs. There'll be an initial drop in a lot of that activity, and we'll start to pat ourselves in the back. And then threat actors are going to start to say, "Oh, you don't want to pay? Let's start targeting high-profile targets and critical infrastructure because we have nothing to lose anymore." And you're going to start having much more significant, larger scale problems. Maybe not at the same volume, but you're going to give them basically a reason to target it. Right now, they're not doing that because of what happened the first time that happened, like with Colonial Pipeline, and they backed off because there's so many other targets they can make money on. But when you take those targets away, they're not going to have anything to lose. So I'm not saying that there isn't pros and cons of that scenario. I do agree that if ransoms weren't paid, eventually ransomware would go away.
But something
But
else would come up.
It would
Like
be
wouldn't something else
it
come
would be
up?
a very
Like
well, that's just it. Whether it's something else or whether they start to do things that are just far more severe to where you'll want to pay the ransom and the government will be kind of forced, have their hand forced. But yeah, of course, there's always something new that comes up in the threat landscape. In this, when you're talking about defending against threats and everything else, there's always creative attackers that have some new thing we never thought of. But specific to ransomware, yeah, I don't think that will just solve the
no.
problem. I just think it will change the situation.
Yeah, to me, I would find it, you know, well, it leads into the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and that is the BlackCat made a new level of street cred, it seems.
Creative tactic.
When they breached a company, Meridian Link, they issued ransomware, they demanded a ransom, they weren't negotiating with them. Apparently they weren't paying the ransom, so they were threatening to leak the data, but then they went a step further. This was the first time that we've seen where they actually notified the SEC that the victim company did not notify within the 4-day new requirement.
It's why I love this job, because every time you think you've seen everything,
love it in a sense. You're like, holy cow.
Right. What do you do with that? I mean, they didn't do anything. That part of it wasn't illegal. Bettered their agenda. You know, it's crazy to me that they actually filed a complaint or notification with the SEC that this company wasn't being compliant. It's one of those things where you just don't expect that to happen. Like, bad guy is gonna create an account and go here and log and notify.
Can you see the analyst or the agent for the SEC when they got that? They like saw that, they're like, right. This is from like BlackCat. Like, this is Alpha V who filed this. Like, it's not like they give their name and their social and their.
Oh, I'm sure either way. I'm sure when it was first received, it was taken, they didn't realize that it was taken. Oh, well, they looked into it and, we might have something here. And then once that came out, it was probably like, what?
I know. Well, so it raises the question of, if they're going to that level, I can only imagine what's next. Like FTC, like any regulatory agency that enforces a regulation on a business, notifying that regulatory agency can now be, I mean, I guess it could have always been a leverage tactic, but it really wasn't anything used that often.
It wasn't. I mean, it's really tough because, you want these companies to be compliant because they weren't reporting these things, and then it's affecting the consumer. And then at the same time, you don't want that same mechanism to be used to get companies to pay ransomware bad guys so that the don't have to let people know. So again, that's why I go back to, I can understand that any company can be breached, but it's how you handle it. If you fully disclose, I get it's embarrassing, I get that it's going to hurt, but it's going to hurt a lot more when you lie and you don't tell people and you end up screwing over your customer base. And so somewhere in between there needs to be an answer. Yeah, we don't want to make there be crazy regulations for notifications, but because companies don't always do the right thing, they do need to be held accountable. And on that, I don't know I know nothing about that particular company. I don't know how they handled the attack, so I won't comment on that. But what I will say is, for the companies that do lie about it, that do tell their customers nothing happened, they should be held accountable. That situation I just told you with that family member, in the notification letter they got, it said, we have your data was stolen, but we have no reason to believe that it's being used for fraudulent purposes. Well, what do you think it's going to be used for? Maybe because it was just stolen.
That's a bunch of crap. No one's gonna. It's like, $5,000 is missing from your safe at home, but we have no reason to believe that it's ever going to be spent. Like, no, they just take the cash to keep it in their house. Of course they're going to spend it.
Right.
I mean, come on. Like, of course they're going to use this data. They're going to sell the data. They're going to use it as a data point in a further breach. Like, it's used repeatedly, oftentimes by several different groups.
Right. Agree. And I also think that there should be, and beyond even just being forced to report when a breach happened, I think that just like this situation, there should be a bare minimum that if you lose people's PII, you have to give them, X amount of a year, 3 years, whatever it might be, of some sort of identity protection, so they can at least have a chance to be notified when these things start to happen, as opposed to having, these massive problems, can't get credit, it affects them buying things, It affects their businesses, things like that. And so these companies are just like, oh, sorry, we're not going to do anything. Like, that's unacceptable.
Absolutely. And we see this a lot in education too. When schools get breached, and schools have been in the news a lot this year. And when schools get breached, it's really bad because most parents don't monitor their kids' credit. And so cyber criminals can take over that identity, use it for years, and then later on find out, right? I mean, that's just it's just brutal,
and it's so weird to clean that up. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, yeah, that's a really bad way to start out. Your life is going from a teenager to a young adult to find out that
you have a foreclosed condo in Vegas, and you're like, what? I'm like, I'm in
and you owe $100,000 credit
I'm
card
graduating
debt.
from high school in New Hampshire. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what?
Right.
Why is that?
Right.
So yeah, that's really tough. What almost gets to a question of what should an organization have to report on when there's a breach? Like, to me, I look to find out. Like, I'll read through or find out somehow through Zoom info or other OSINT measures. Like, I want to find out, what were they doing beforehand? What preventative levels? Like, to me, there's organizations that are trying some things, and they're at least they're trying. Nobody's really doing all the security layers they should most often, unless they're like an enterprise level. But even small businesses, they need to be doing some things, and there's some of them you read about and you're like, they were doing nothing. Like, no user training. They were like doing it once a year. There was like no endpoint detection. There was no visibility into the network. Like, they weren't really doing anything. And so they should be fined or should be hit like harder. Like you know, 100%. Like the spending and prevention should, like, there was a lot of pushback, and a lot of people were like, well, we can't afford it. Yeah, you can. You couldn't afford IT support. You couldn't afford servers originally. You couldn't afford the cloud originally, but you eventually did it because it actually gives you a competitive advantage. It allows you to make more money, allows you to scale. There's ways to find a way to support it. You just have to make it important.
Yeah. The problem, though, is there is no mechanism there to hold them accountable for it. So yeah, if they're not protecting, there's so many different levels of standards, not even standards, so many different levels of security posture that we see that companies have today, or lack of it. And once these breaches happen, again, it's the consumer that ends up being harmed. It's the people whose data that they were supposed to be protecting that ends up being harmed. So when you continue on with business as usual, and there is not a penalty, or there is no one to hold them accountable, there's no motivation for them to fix it outside of their public reputation being damaged. And clearly, like in this case with this medical organization I was talking about yesterday, sometimes they just don't
Right.
care. So what do you do? I don't have an answer, but it's
I'm surprised
why
that
we're
happened
getting our
from a
butts kicked.
medical organization too. Kind of surprised.
Yeah, well, they said because it was 9 million people, and they said it was just too many. That it's just like they were treating it almost like it was an act of God type of thing. Like, this just happened, it's inevitable, nothing we can do about it. And maybe there'll be more, that'll come out with that, because that just hit the news a few days ago, I believe, that the specifics on the company.
Well, there'll be a
So
massive class action. Maybe they're just saving their money up for that.
I hope so. They deserve
Yeah.
it. They have no place being in when that's how they respond to these sort of things, especially when it's healthcare data, because that's not just your financial aspect. I mean, the financial aspect is in it as well, but those are your private personal records. I mean, we need to go back to using paper for medical records, I think, because nobody seems to be able to protect our data
Yeah.
anymore. I wish I was in charge of protecting my own data. I would feel much safer about that than all these other organizations having it out there. It's just you have no control.
Well, we've actually talked to some people that are developing things like that. It's just that they're all in the startup phase, right? But they have like components and ways. Mark, do you remember the one company? I forgot his name, but it's in a prior episode. Please watch. Please pay attention to our prior episodes, because clearly I didn't. But it was really interesting because he was talking about how being able to encapsulate your own financial information, your own medical information, and you just provide people with, it's almost like a link, if you think about it, to it,
Yes,
but you are in control of it. And I'm like, that needs to be the norm. Like, that is brilliant.
Agree. And then there's people that are going to say, oh, well, I don't know how to do that. But you know what? And that's why you need to learn how to do it. But don't worry, the companies that were already guarding your data don't know how to do it either, so you'll be okay. But I would much rather be able to be in control of my data that is out there, and I'm not, and that sucks, because I know I would do a better job of it, and then at least then if something happens, that's on me, not on someone
and it's almost
else.
less complicated. Like when security sometimes. I think it's driven by so many vendors. We tend to overcomplicate things, lots of acronyms, lots of bold claims like social engineering solves. You know what I mean? Like, you are always secure and you buy this box and you're going to have it. And I'm like, what? Like, are you kidding me? Like, it is not the way that it works. It's not a product. Like, security is not a product. It's not going to happen that way. But in so many ways it can be simple. Like, when you think about, if you reverse some of it, right, and you keep a lot of it in a central location that you can control, and you block that from outside, there's a whole bunch of different ways for different segments of different types of data that you can really keep it protected. Tell me about what have you been focused on? What is your research? You and your team, you have a partner in crime there now, and she's been publishing some really good work too.
Yeah. So I worked with Anastasia on her last report, which she put out a couple weeks ago, where basically we were just doing some analysis on the trends with ransomware payments. I reached out and had a conversation with LockBit, and they gave us a bunch of information on how business was going and some of the struggles they were having with their, what they'll call their partners, where you had a lot of really young, talented hackers that were committing ransomware crimes, but they weren't so experienced with negotiating, and therefore they had a lot of low-paying ransom payments.
Really?
Because they
didn't know how to sell a car, or they didn't know how to buy a car, right?
Yeah.
Correct. So in true LockBit fashion, I always say that they run their operation like a business. In true LockBit fashion, he got everybody together, presented the problem, took a poll on some possible solutions, and then came up with a tiered structure on how to assess targets and what percentage of their revenue you are allowed to negotiate with.
So
And
okay, so hang
it's
on. So
it's
hang on.
crazy.
Wow.
So hang on a minute. So for the listeners,
Oh my
let's
gosh.
evaluate what we just heard from Johnny.
Yeah. As my therapist would say, there's a
There's a
lot to
lot to
unpack.
unpack here. So you, Jon DiMaggio, private citizen in the US, wearing a cape, you went undercover or you went to the dark web and you spoke to some of the most prolific, successful, powerful cybercrime gangs. Hey, how's your model going? How's business? How are your vendors?
Business.
How's your team morale? How are sales? And they
Yeah,
were like, well, Johnny, let me tell you. And they like opened up to you
it's actually a
and they
lot like
shared
that.
this with you.
Yes.
That is friggin'
Yeah, well,
ridiculous.
I don't do the fake personas
No,
with them
because they know
anymore
who you
because they're
are.
using my face, yeah, as their avatar. So I just talk to them. But yeah, he does call me
Yeah.
Johnny. We do have conversations very similar. They are usually friendly and professional because at
Well, it's
this
not
point, there's no
personal.
point in
They're
being
not going
shady.
after you. You're not even
Right,
going after them.
right,
You just like you were kind of exposed who they were. They respected you for doing it. And there's a mutual like you're not
right,
going to Russia anytime soon. You're not going to bump
right,
into them. Like they're not we know
right,
they're not coming out. They're not coming here, right? Because as soon as they do,
right.
they'll be arrested. So it's more like okay, from afar, you can have a professional working relationship. There's mutual respect there.
Yeah. That's what I did. I reached out and I told him so prior to that I had met or we Anastasia and I had met with some ransom
Oh,
negotiators, good
yep.
guys, not bad ones, and talked about some of the problems and things that they were seeing. And so I thought it might be beneficial to have a conversation with Lockbit and say, hey, these are some of the struggles that we're seeing on our side. I'm pretty sure that if we're seeing this, there has to be something on your end that's either
Right.
causing that or struggles you're seeing. There's got to be somewhere in the middle that we can meet. And there's people out there who will be like, oh, well, you're helping support the ransomware ecosystem like that. Well, no, when companies are getting decimated, what I want to do is try and to help facilitate the best possible solutions that I
Exactly.
can. So when I have multiple negotiators telling me the same
Right.
thing, the same problems are happening, I thought it would be worthwhile. So Anastasia has a good background in tracking cryptocurrency and things of that nature. I've got a background in doing direct engagements. So between the two of us, it made for a good pair in addition to reaching out, talking, like I said, with these negotiators. So getting that information, and Lockbit shared a lot more with us back than I expected, to be honest with you.
Well, that's good
Getting
though.
all the
I think it's
information.
good. I mean,
Right. It's good to know if you're a negotiator what you're
right.
going in with, if there's rules in place already to what they're going to be allowed to negotiate. If you come in way below that, the chances of that negotiation ending prematurely and that company just being basically out of luck in their data getting exposed, I think it's better to go in knowing that. From the same thing, from an adversary side, if they're going in and they know they can only ask for a certain amount and you have negotiators that don't know that, again, no one wins. Not that I want them to win, but no one wins in those situations. So the best case scenario is obviously to pay as little as possible to get your data back, but you also don't want to go in with the wrong approach and just have everything ripped out from under you and all your data is leaked on the internet, like we saw with, not saying that they did this, but like with Boeing, like that negotiation ended, their data got exposed.
Well, that wraps this up. Thanks for joining, everybody. Hope you got value out of digging deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today. Please don't forget to help keep this going by subscribing free to our YouTube channel at Cybercrime Junkies Podcast and download and enjoy all of our past episodes on Apple and Spotify podcasts so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank you for joining us. So welcome everybody to Cybercrime Junkies. I am your host, David Morrow. In the studio today is the Mark Mosher, my always positive co-host and fantabulous, according to my insincere things to say to coworkers app, and security researcher Logan Potberg joins us as well. Gentlemen, how are you?
Oh, well. Interesting turn of events in the last 48 hours or so.
Yeah, so this is going to be a quick episode because it's breaking news, and we just wanted to kind of explain it to everybody. Typically, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but typically the cybercrime gangs that are launching ransomware and doing these cyber attacks have had rules.
Yep.
They've had some rules. They've had similar to mafia
rules of engagement.
Mafia rules.
Unspoken rules.
Yeah, it's like rules of
honor among thieves.
And Alpha V, which is BlackCat, they're the number 2 most prolific gang beside LockBit. And the FBI has been taking them down, and then they've been re-seizing their information. Then they took them down, and they grabbed the decrypt keys, giving it to victims. It's an ongoing battle. It's still going on today. But the point is they have now issued on their dark web channels, all rules are gone. Go after hospitals, go after nuclear power plants, go after critical infrastructure.
So stay tuned, buckle up. This reads like a James Bond script, but it's all real and it's all happening right now.
Yeah, unbelievable. So as always, this is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show. Come join us as we dive deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today, interviewing top technology leaders from around the world and sharing true cybercrime stories to raise awareness. From the creators of Vigilance, the newest global technology newsletter translating cyber news into business language we all understand. So please help us keep this going by subscribing for free to our YouTube channel and downloading our podcast episodes on Apple and Spotify so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show. All right, welcome everybody. We are in the studio today. I'm David Morrow. In the studio today is Mark Mosher. We're researching and following in dark web feeds and some other social feeds and news outlets about the recent BlackCat takedown by the FBI. BlackCat, as you will recall, was a leading ransomware gang, second only really this last year to LockBit, and they were involved in the ransomware component along with Scattered Spider of taking down the MGM and Caesars breach.
Yep.
Here, you're able to see that just in the last hour, there's news reports. There's hundreds of them, but we checked out Bleeping Computer. The FBI disrupts the BlackCat ransomware operation and creates decryption tools to provide the data back to the victims. This is massive, right? Department of Justice announced today that the FBI was successful in breaching Alpha V, which is BlackCat. And BlackCat is interesting because it's a ransomware that's written in Rust, which is a new code format, which is very easy and trendy to use. So it's pretty interesting. But they were able to not only breach Alpha V's infrastructure, but they were able to disrupt their entire ransomware operations and monitor their activities in order to obtain the decryption keys and provide those for victims. On December 7th, Bleeping Computer is one of the first to report that Alpha V, also known as BlackCat, all of their websites. So these cybercrime gangs have websites on the dark web, right, Mark? And they have leak sites and they have Tox channels on the dark webs, which are encrypted dark web communications where when you get hit with ransomware in the real world, right, you have to download the Tor browser and then go to the dark web and communicate with these criminals. But things have heated up, and it's getting really bad. There's a running
to say the
issue
least
with cybercrime gangs, and that is they typically stay away from certain targets, right, Mark? Like they don't go after nuclear power plants. They don't go after healthcare, children's hospitals, things like that. There's just a thing because they
don't go after healthcare. They don't go after children's hospitals.
And the reason they do that is then, they don't get targeted as much necessarily by law enforcement, because law enforcement they have limited resources and they have to focus on the ones that are truly doing the most damage. Well, apparently all that has changed. So Alpha V admins, so Alpha V, their admin claimed at first that it was a hosting issue.
Been a tough couple days for BlackCat.
Computer and others in the
It's been a tough couple days.
Learned that it was related. It was related to law enforcement operation. And then just today, and this was just released about 50 minutes ago, and it is Wednesday, December 20th at 11:15 Eastern. The Department of Justice confirmed that they had actually taken down Alpha V, and they conducted a law enforcement operation that allowed them to gain access to Alpha V's infrastructure. With that access, the FBI silently monitored the ransomware operation for months while siphoning decryption keys. That's huge.
They developed they found 400 victims. They developed the decrypt key and sent it to them. So you got to think, if BlackCat, if they were just doing, I don't know, $1 million per victim, that's 400 million they're out of. And they were asking for a whole lot more than that per victim, and they lost it all. So what did they do? They come right back and issue the proclamation that the gloves are off. What did they say, David? I think we've even got a screenshot that you can now go after anybody, anywhere, anytime, except critical infrastructure. Or I guess that's where they draw the line.
Oh yeah, because there's honor.
Right.
The Bleeping Computer article right now, it gives a conservative number. They say the encryption keys allowed the FBI to help 500 victims, and a lot of these are smaller SMBs as well, right? Which is $100,000, $200,000, $500,000. But it allowed the FBI to help 500 victims recover their files for free, saving at a minimum of $68 million in ransom demands. That's phenomenal, right? So let's get to some of these.
Where's their proclamation? It's almost like a tit for tat. Like, the FBI got us, we denied it, we tried to save face, they proved us wrong, they gave out the decrypt key, they took money from us. Now we're telling the affiliates you can take the gloves off. And this is all within, a very, very short period of time.
Yep.
Some of this just happened last night. Some of it just happened today.
See this? Let me make this a full screen and zoom in.
Yeah, there we go.
So walk us through this. So this is something from the dark web. And it says, as you know, the FBI got the keys to our blog. So this is from the heads of BlackCat, the ones that have been in the news all year long. And it says, now we'll tell you how it was. I really should do this in like a Russian accent, don't you think? Like, first, how it all happened. After examining the documents, we understood that they gained access to one of the DC, the domain controllers, because the other DC was untouched. It turns out that they somehow hacked one of our hosters. Maybe even he himself helped them. So they think one of their inside guys flipped on them. So that's interesting.
It turns out that's the rumor going around. Is that it was an inside job.
The federal government has a $10 million reward for anybody leading to takedown of the Klopp ransomware gang, Lace Tempest. So, but now we're focused here on BlackCat. So possibly something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. So BlackCat is saying the maximum.
Well, there you go. Look at line number 9.
Last month and a half.
That's where they take the gloves off.
Worth of keys in the last month and a half. Just shows you how big their operations. It's about 400 companies, but now more than 3,000 companies will never receive their keys because of the FBI. Because of their actions, we are introducing new rules, or rather removing all the rules except one. You cannot touch the CIS. The critical infrastructure systems. Do they mean of BlackCat? I think they might.
Critical. No, they're talking about, this is like a proclamation to their affiliates as well as a external communique, but they're saying anything is a potential target except critical infrastructure, like the power grid, water supply, things like that. But they even say, look, you can now go after hospitals, nuclear power plants. Serious? Really?
Yeah, look at that. Hey, Logan, welcome. So we were just reviewing the recent news that just came across the wires with Bleeping Computer and hundreds of others. Well, we focused on the Bleeping Computer article that talked about the battle going on between the FBI and BlackCat, and how over the last week they've been taken down. Now they're back up, then they're taken down. And we got some threads from the dark web and some things posted on certain social media by groups that are talking directly to this, and we're sharing those. So what BlackCat just said is, because the FBI took down our infrastructure, they're now introducing new rules for their
removal of rules.
And the new rules are they're removing all rules, meaning the rules about you can't go after water treatment plants, you can't go after nuclear sites, you can't go after children's cancer hospitals. All those rules are gone. Okay. Yeah, except one, you can't touch the CIS, the critical infrastructure. You can now block hospitals, nuclear power plants, anything and anywhere.
Didn't they hit a nuclear power plant in like Nevada or New Mexico? Like there was a government agency.
I don't know.
I thought there was.
I don't know, because I don't know that was BlackCat, because BlackCat's up there with LockBit, and usually, you know, the ones that have the most power kind of tend to have these kind of wars, you know. Like
speaking of other gangs,
think of like the Geneva Convention.
Now it turns out, David, didn't we see from one of our intel feeds that LockBit is now trying to pilfer affiliates of BlackCat? Like you guys have been exposed. You're not going to be effective. You're on the radar. Come work for us.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. So look at this too. BlackCat's now paying affiliates 90% of what they get.
Yeah, they're pissed.
90%. That's bigger than any of the other ones. That's a lot. So we do not give any discounts to companies. Payment is strictly the amount that we specified. So no negotiation.
Yeah,
all gloves
it's going to
are
be
off.
ugly.
VIP advertisers, that's what they call their affiliates. VIP advertisers receive their private affiliate program, which we raise only for them on a separate domain controller, completely isolated from each other. Thank you for your experience. We will take into account our mistakes and work even harder. Waiting for your whining in chat rooms and requests to make discounts, but that no longer exists. So VX Underground, which
there it is. There we go.
Viewers and listeners to follow on Twitter. VX Underground is a research group that goes on the dark web and has access to all these cybercrime gangs. And they note, and this was 13 hours ago, and again, this is Wednesday, December 20th at 11:20 a.m. Eastern. We spoke with LockBit Ransomware Group administrative staff. This is the group that Jon DiMaggio speaks directly with, that we talk about quite a bit. And they asked them about the Alpha V, the BlackCat situation. LockBit believes that what happened to Alpha V is unfortunate, and the FBI does pose a considerable threat to his organization as well, to LockBit. And then they released this image. It's been translated from Russian to English.
It's getting better every episode.
Is my impression getting better, comrade? All right. What is your opinion about the? Sorry, everybody. I'll go back. What's your opinion about the current situation with Alpha V? Do you think the FBI poses a threat? I think the situation is unfortunate. The FBI certainly poses a threat to me. This is the head of LockBit, the number one cybercrime ransomware gang on the planet today. Okay, so if you thought that John Gotti had power or the mafia had power, they pale in comparison.
Imagine being a global crime.
These guys do this at scale globally. Yes, like Al Capone had.
You're not
nothing
big in one of the
on
five
these guys.
boroughs. You're known globally.
Yeah. So Smelly VX. That must be
that's
his
awesome.
Tox or his encrypted channel username. That's awesome. The document shows that they had an undercover agent posing as a partner, as an affiliate, to gain access to the panel. Then, having gained access to the panels, they hacked them. Does this bother your organization? You can only imagine what LockBit says. LockBit says, of course, this worries my organization. Access to my dashboard is just as easy. I've always been convinced that vulnerabilities are the main threat to my security and a threat to my business. Again, they view this.
Did you catch the irony in that
as
statement?
we've reported before.
the main threat to my business as far as cybersecurity is the vulnerabilities. What do we tell clients all the time?
Yeah.
You need to understand your vulnerabilities.
Yeah. So LockBit's worried about
their cybersecurity.
LockBit's worried. Yeah, maybe they need a managed SIM,
managed vulnerability service, something like that. Right?
The real issue is clearly BlackCat didn't have tabletop exercises and an incident response plan.
They weren't prepared,
right? Like if they would have listened to us, they would have been more prepared. Sorry, except that we're on the side of the good guys, so we're not doing that for them. So, okay. The document shows, of course, that worries. We have seen the fall of our evil, right? Revel, Conti, Hive, which happened earlier this year, the one that was taking down the healthcare.
Yeah.
The Ragnar Locker, Breached, Red Forums, Quackbot, Trickbot, Raccoon Stealer, Darkside, right? Black Matter.
They were around not long ago.
A lot of those guys.
They came from Conti, didn't they?
Are evil. Darkside and Black Matter, a lot of those guys are part of Alpha V now. It's not like they disappeared, right? Unless they hit a Russian entity, they don't disappear. These guys are just rebranded.
Unless you get recruited to go work for the government.
Yeah, exactly.
That mandatory recruitment. Yeah, right, where they have 100% acceptance rate.
So, yes, exactly. So, why do you believe that you didn't fail? You didn't fall. He's asking LockBit that. He says, I can fall just like anybody else. It's not scary to fall. It's just scary to not get up. If you were hacked by the FBI, would you rebrand or would you continue LockBit operations?
And it's a really good interview. This is a really
underground. This is really good interview. Thank you for this. It's making a good podcast.
Like, if you have the chance to speak to the head of LockBit, like, you can get
Smelly's he's right on with his questions. Smelly VX.
Smelly VX has got. He's money, man. He said, "Would you rebrand or would you continue as LockBit?" I mean, they bought the shirts.
I almost got the tattoo.
They got the cups.
Jon DiMaggio almost paid me $2,000 to get the tattoo.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah, they did. LockBit had a tattoo.
I missed it. It closed before I could take part, but DiMaggio said he would still pay me if I would get that tattooed across my chest. It was like this close.
Yeah, and I doubled the offer because I want to see it. So, but you know what's going to happen? Mosher's going to have a LockBit tattoo put on, and then instantly they're going to rebrand to be like,
they'll be like
Drunk Panda. They're going to be like some other name, and then he's going to have to like exit out. It's like putting some ex-girlfriend on there, and then he's got to exit out. So the head of LockBit says, I've never thought about it, but I think I would rebrand. I wouldn't rebrand. Strike that. He said, I've never thought about it, but I think I would not rebrand. Signature analysis works too well. I won't be able to change my behavior even if I try very hard. The rebranding will be revealed, and therefore it won't make any sense. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'll continue operations under my current
These guys are like marketing gurus or something? Wow.
Have you taken any action to strengthen your defenses after the Alpha attack? We got a call. They want to do an incident response plan.
Yeah, what action is he going to take?
Vulnerability management. He's got a meeting with Kando.
Well, see, and what they're alluding to also is that the affiliates have their own panel. So you could potentially, you could breach an affiliate and obviously find a way back to their DC and somehow get in there. Yeah. So it's, the good guys are catching up, man. This is encouraging. The good guys are catching up. Score one for the home team.
Look at this. LockBit goes, yes. Yeah. And this is a great win for the home team. So LockBit says, yes, hacking my competitors motivates me very well to enhance security. So VX Underground says, updated, and this was 15 hours ago, updated United States government versus Alpha V ransomware group. The FBI has again re-seized Alpha V's old website. Alpha V then took it back. It's been seized again and then unseized 4 times today. So this is
there it is. LockBit Ransomware Group is now trying to poach Alpha V developers and affiliates.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That.
After Smelly just gave him a shout out too. Man, really? Is there no no love among
and look at this meeting. Alpha V versus FBI, and then VX Underground's there doing a bong, like watching. That's bizarre. Here's another one from earlier yesterday, so that would have been Tuesday, December 19th. Summary of the United States government and associated entities versus Alpha V ransomware group, December 10th.
Yeah, that's when they took it down.
Alpha V primary domain goes, so here's the timeline. So December 10th, Alpha V primary domain goes offline. The administration of Alpha V of BlackCat says that it was a hardware failure. Yeah. They're fine. Later on that day, rumors circulate that it was law enforcement that took them down. Then the next day, Alpha V denies those allegations. They say it wasn't law enforcement. We're good. Everything's fine. Remember,
they were like, if you got to say you're good, then you're not good.
Yeah, it's not. We're back. Right. And then a whole 8 days later, they're still not back up. The whole 8 days later, the domain is seized again. Okay. So
they were like, that was the old one. It doesn't matter.
Yes. Alpha V says, no, that's the old domain. It doesn't matter. Okay. Then later on that morning, a couple hours later, the United States Department of Justice releases an official statement on the seizure of Alpha V, as well as compromising of their servers. So that was yesterday.
So now we're taking credit too.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And then later on yesterday afternoon, Alpha V unseizes the domain and threatens retaliation against the United States and the associated entities, which means like the UK, other groups that are working alongside U.S. law enforcement, by allowing attacks against critical infrastructure. So they are allowing attacks against critical infrastructure. It's crazy. So hang on, I'm still scrolling
I think you're just going to get further back in the timeline, but that's a lot of stuff in a really short period of time. That's probably the most adverse exercises that we've seen against a cybercrime gang in quite a while, since the Our Evil takedown. I mean, just because that was public facing and everybody could watch it on TV, but
and they had the videos. You can still see them on YouTube. It was like
now they're
typical
all
Russian
for the
takedown, knocking on the door.
The Russian cyber
with
team
rifles.
now developing code.
So here's
That's when they said they
site
unseized
on the
it,
dark web. Yeah, this website has been unseized. Ladies and gentlemen, it says, right? We've moved here, and they have a
don't
new
click
link
on the link
to where you can find them. And then the rest,
Right.
click.
If you do,
trying to keep my cybersecurity friends in business.
open the corporate
click,
VPN
click,
and then do it.
Yes, exactly. And then here's this is all in Russian, so I don't want to. I want to spare.
But this is big stuff, and there's more to come, right? Like we're not even to the holidays yet, so wait till the holidays, because we know survey says come the holidays, cybercrime really ramps up. So now that the gloves are off,
so we will continue following.
Let's see what
this.
happens next.
We poked the bear.
Yep.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah. So we will continue to follow this. Thanks for the research, guys. This is awesome. And then I'm sure there will be more. So we will update, and we'll have information on this in our Vigilance newsletter. Links in the show notes. And thanks everybody for joining. This is great. Well, that wraps this up. Thanks for joining, everybody. Hope you got value out of digging deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today. Please don't forget to help keep this going by subscribing free to our YouTube channel at Cybercrime Junkies Podcast, and download and enjoy all of our past episodes on Apple and Spotify podcasts so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank you for joining us. Come join us as we dive deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today, interviewing top technology leaders from around the world and sharing true cybercrime stories to raise awareness. From the creators of Vigilance, the newest global technology newsletter translating cyber news into business language we all understand. So please help us keep this going by subscribing for free to our YouTube channel and downloading our podcast episodes on Apple and Spotify so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show.
So in true LockBit fashion, I always say that they run their operation like a business. In true LockBit fashion, he got everybody together, presented the problem, took a poll on some possible solutions, and then came up with a tiered structure on how to assess targets and what percentage of their revenue you are allowed to negotiate with.
So,
and,
okay, so hang on. So
it's
hang
crazy.
on.
Wow.
So hang on a minute. So for the listeners, let's evaluate what we just heard from Johnny.
Yeah, because my therapist would say there's
a lot to unpack here. So you, Jon DiMaggio, private citizen in the U.S., wearing a cape, you went undercover or you went to the dark web and you spoke to some of the most prolific, successful, powerful cybercrime gangs. Hey, how's your model going? How's business? How are your vendors? How's your team morale? How are sales? And they were like, well, Johnny, let me tell you. And they like opened up to you and they shared this with you. That is friggin' ridiculous.
I don't bother. I don't do the fake personas.
No, because they know who you are.
They're using my face, as their avatar. So I just talk to them. But he does call me Johnny. Yeah. We do have conversations very similar. They are usually friendly and professional because at this point, there's no point in
they're not going after you. You're not even going after them. You just you were kind of exposed who they were. They respected you for doing it, and there's a mutual you're not going to Russia anytime soon. You're not going to bump into them. They're not. We know they're not coming out. They're not coming here, right? Because as soon as they do, they'll be arrested. So it's more like, okay, from afar, you can have a professional working relationship. There's mutual respect there.
Yeah. That's what I did. I reached out and I told him. So prior to that, I had met, or we, Anastasia and I had met with some ransom negotiators, good guys, not bad ones, and talked about some of the problems and things that they were seeing. And so I thought it might be beneficial to have a conversation with LockBit and say, hey, these are some of the struggles that we're seeing on our side. I'm pretty sure that if we're seeing this, there has to be something on your end that's either causing that or struggles you're seeing. There's got to be somewhere in the middle that we can meet. And, there's people out there who will be like, oh, well, you're helping support the ransomware ecosystem like that. Well, no, when companies are getting decimated, what I want to do is try to help facilitate the best possible solutions that I can. So when I have multiple negotiators telling me the same thing, the same problems are happening, I thought it would be worthwhile. So Anastasia has a good background in tracking cryptocurrency and things of that nature. I've got a background in doing direct engagements. So between the two of us, it made for a good pair, in addition to reaching out, talking, like I said, with these negotiators. So getting that information, and LockBit shared a lot more with us back than I expected, to be honest with you.
Well, that's good, though. I think it's good.
Right. It's good to know, if you're a negotiator, what you're going in with, if there's rules in place already to what they're going to be allowed to negotiate. If you come in way below that, the chances of that negotiation ending prematurely and that company just being basically out of luck and their data getting exposed, I think it's better to go in knowing that. From the same thing, from an adversary side, if they're going in and they know they can only ask for a certain amount, and you have negotiators that don't know that, again, no one wins. Not that I want them to win, but no one wins in those situations. So the best case scenario is obviously to pay as little as possible to get your data back, but you also don't want to go in with the wrong approach and just have everything ripped out from under you and all your data is leaked on the internet, like we saw with, not saying that they did this, but like with Boeing, that negotiation ended, their data got exposed. And, that wasn't one of the ones who I talked to, but there was some other big ones where I talked to negotiators, and they were the scenario where they were coming in way down low and the other guys were way up here, and they weren't even close to meeting in the middle. So by the time, the thing is you only have so much time. That timer's going, and once that timer ends, unless someone does something to intervene, it automatically will publish that data. So the point being is, if you don't know that and you're playing, the negotiation game, going back and forth, you only have so much time to do that. And if when you're getting down to 24 hours and you're still so far off, it's not helping anyone. So again, just trying to arm people with the information going in up front to understand, well, the rules have changed on the other side, so you should be aware that this is what's happening, whether you agree with it or not. That knowledge is power, and going into that can only
Absolutely. And I mean, two factors there. One, we've interviewed several of the actual negotiators, and they explain it is a really emotional, difficult time for business owners, for leaders and organizations in charge of that. Is it not, Johnny? I mean,
it is. It's tough.
they've
Yeah, I mean,
reported guys
it's
passing
really
out. They
tough.
reported one guy had a heart attack. They were because especially small businesses and, you know, I mean, even mid-sized, you know, 50 million, $70 million companies, this is their livelihood. The partners, the investors, like everything is tied to this, and it all goes away if this goes south. And it's not planned.
Yes.
They weren't planning on it. It's not on the forecast. It's not budgeted for.
Most aren't prepared for it.
Insurance
insurance
either
companies aren't paying
declines.
them like they claim
Insurance either declines coverage, or they only limit what they'll do. They don't do everything that you would think they would do. It's a really trying time. And then, you know, and then the issue is, you know, if you're going to pay and if you're going to do this, again, if you're not doing the preventative measures like we talked about earlier, right, then you have to pay. Because if you don't have separate backups that they didn't already encrypt and copy and lock you out of, right? Or adequate backups, things that were tested, like you have to pay, otherwise you're out of business.
So interesting story, just what you just said. So I don't know, maybe it was 3 weeks ago, there was a conversation with LockBit and another guy who's pretty well known in the criminal community, and they were having a conversation about this, and it surprised me to hear LockBit say ransomware is dead. Now, he was referring to ransomware as your payload, and that, you know, that encrypts all your data. And he didn't mean that the ransomware as a whole is dead, but what he was saying is in just going in and encrypting a company's data is no longer worth the time and the effort. And the other guy was arguing back or making his point that it's still worth doing because, well, they both agreed that stealing data and using that to extort a company is the most effective. The other criminal was arguing that, well, crippling them when they're already, you know, wounded and they're in the situation only is going to entice them to pay further by hurting them when they're weak. So he was advocating that you know, you keep going and you keep doing it this way, and they are doing it this way. It was just a conversation, but the fact, again, just that actual correspondence back and forth, I just find it interesting to see what, you know, these, you know, we know what we think, but what do these guys think? And, you know, they have the same conversations. You know, we see it in the public all the time, like predictions for ransomware, and you talk about, oh, well, we're going to see a move more towards data theft as opposed to just encryption. And, well, they're having similar conversations, just with different views and angles.
Well, I'm interested to see, are they going to start telling everybody's high school teacher that they cheated in class? Are they going to start notifying every single regulatory agency, hey, they didn't do this? Oh, by the way, there was another HIPAA violation. We had somebody stop by there and there was medical records sitting in the printer tray that we saw. So we want to report them for that too. Like, are they going to be telling teacher about everything?
You didn't lock your screen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They also don't lock their screens when they walk away, by the way. Right? Like,
but you know what that shows? That I think sometimes, I don't know that we lose sight of, but I think other people fail to see or recognize that this is a true criminal element. I mean, these guys are criminals.
Oh, yeah. They're doing nothing differently than
they're just looking to extort money. Yeah. They're just trying to find new ways to extort. Yeah. That's all.
Can you not see Gotti's group, like, or somebody from the 80s and 90s going to certain levels like this? Like, of course they did.
Yeah.
They would go like this.
Of course. Well, they ran it like a business also.
They ran it like a
you
business.
Just take, you take the emotional element out, and they're gonna try not to involve people that aren't involved, but the people like the target and them, they're gonna stay focused on them, and they're just gonna do that. It's like it's like a mob hit where you don't kill the bystanders, unlike gangland shootings, right? Where they just shoot everybody.
Right.
Like, this is just mob hit. You're just killing the person you have the beef with, and that's it. So,
well, and you know, I think that's also one of the reasons why you don't see, as much of like violence as a service type of stuff being used. Because once you get to that level, well, now we're talking a whole different game. Like, it's one thing for a company to pay because there's data getting stolen, but once you start talking about violence and adding other aspects to it, it changes everything. Yeah. So I think that's a good thing that it hasn't gone there for the most part, with the exception of a few groups.
Well, there's some of the younger groups. You see some of the criminal enterprises that are doing a lot of the fraud scams and the identity theft, the credit card theft. They're doing the swatting and the SIM swapping and that. But I think there's a lot. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like there's a lot less money in that, and there's more. There's more crime, and guess what? That's going to get the heat the most. That's going to be something that, because that segues, blurs the line between the digital and the physical world, and you still have all of that might and all of that power of the physical police that know how to solve those problems, right?
Right. I agree. Well, and I think that, when you see, like, again, ransomware attacks today, they're going after these companies that can pay big payouts. So, they work for a few weeks to get to get their access, to get the data stolen, to get things encrypted, and then they get this huge payout. So for them,
it's a positive ROI.
Why do more?
It's a positive.
Right. Yeah. Right.
It just kills me that we can't figure out how to do better. I always say this, but it reminds me of the 1980s war on drugs, where we talk a big game, but we're not actually doing anything to win it. And I can't. Obviously not just me, but I can't figure out how to change that, how to get a better grasp on that. But I do know that the way we're doing it right now, things aren't going well. In that conversation, though, that I was talking about before between those two criminals, one of the things that they did note is that since the 2020, 2021 timeframe, they've also noticed that companies are much better now with storing offline backups. And that is why encryption alone also doesn't work as well for ransom. So I guess as much as I'm saying, we do things poorly, I guess hearing that conversation between two of the, one of the top ransomware gangs in the world and a very high-ranking criminal, that have that conversation and to say that at least we're getting better at something.
It's almost like they have a Salesforce. Like, it's almost like they're charting all of this, right? And they're seeing the trends, and they're deciding what tactics. Well, I think that's why,
is that maybe why we're seeing more of this extortion level to release data or sell? It's no longer we're gonna lock up your system and you got to pay us to unlock it. It's, hey, we've got all your data. We know you can get your data back, but we're also going to give it to all your competitors. Release it into the wild.
Well, that brings up the whole MGM thing. They got popped or whatever, and all that data got stolen. And there's somebody, I don't know if they're actually related, but they claim to be selling data that was stolen from that breach.
I saw that last night.
So you just don't know where it's going to end up, is my point. And then you have guys that, and probably girls too, that pretend to sell that data. And there's been so many leaks now, they'll literally go take something that
they're scraping the data and then selling it.
That was one of the responses last night that I saw when they gave a sample of the data, and somebody quickly chimed in and said, "No, that's from the 2020 breach. Like, no, that's old."
Right.
Yeah,
but that's my point.
That's old.
Yeah, so there's so much out there, though, you don't even know, and now you got bad guys scamming bad guys. It's crazy. It's a mess.
Yeah.
Well, the MGM breach is so interesting simply because first of all, in no other industry do you have, when you're suffering from a data breach and your systems are down, do you have thousands of people making TikToks of your stuff being down? Like, what other industry suffers like that, right? Like, that was just brutal. Like they could say whatever they wanted to headquarters. Everybody saw what was really going on, right? And the online, everything online was down. Like, it was absolutely brutal for them. However, did they not do the right thing? Like, they didn't pay. They evaluated. The CEO came out, and I'm talking about MGM. MGM came out and said, look, we evaluated. We realized it's going to take this amount of time to restore. If we paid, we'd get it back around this amount of time. We chose to follow the law enforcement advice not to pay. We didn't pay. There's a lot of people saying, well, they're likely not going to get targeted again necessarily as much as Caesars, who paid right away. Once you pay right away, statistically, don't the odds go up for you? Like they're kind of a soft target. Like we can hit them again. They'll pay.
Yeah, yes, you make a good point with that. But since we're pointing out all the negatives, let's also point out the positives with Caesars. They weren't even in the news until the MGM happened. Nobody even knew about it, and none of their
handled it so like
customers' data is going to be going out the door. So and I'm not saying to pay. I'm just pointing it out because we're pointing out all the other side of it.
Right.
So and I don't have that answer, but that's the hard.
Well, that's what makes those two breaches so interesting to discuss, because on the one, you followed the best practice rule, right? And look at how they suffered and how long they were down. And everybody talks about it. When they talk about it, they always talk about the MGM breach. They barely remember the other casino, right? And Caesars wasn't even gonna, like, nobody knew about it, and they had already resolved it. It was already resolved by the time MGM got hit. Unbelievable. And they didn't follow what you're supposed to do. They immediately paid, and they didn't go down, and everybody was happy, and they were profitable. It wasn't a blip on their.
But bad guys made whatever it was, $10 million.
Yeah, and it wasn't even. And the amount that they paid wasn't even a percentage where they even had to disclose it technically on their SEC form. I read. I could be wrong. That's what I read. But then, because MGM got hit, everybody heard about them, so they're like, "Well, we better disclose it on the SEC form then." Like, you might as well tell the investors because they hear about it now. But like, they only paid $15 million. They make X amount per day. It wasn't that big of a blip for them.
Right. Well, and that's why I think the answer to should you pay or not pay a ransom really is case by case.
Yeah, I don't know how you can like that. That was my concern. Is I see the intent behind it. Don't pay the bad guys. They'll go away. Like, it's a very widespread, naive view, though, because that's not the way it is. That's not going to apply. It literally could make things 10 times worse.
Right.
Before I worked ransomware, back when I did just espionage, that was my take: is companies shouldn't be allowed to pay.
It'd be so simple. Just do it, right? And that's why I could see Congress passing it, because they were like, "Oh, well, we're paying bad guys. Well, let's just outlaw it." I'm like, well, hang on, like. You don't think, because the lawyer in me goes, okay, then how do we define the term ransomware payment? That term will be litigated 1,000 times, because we can't pay a ransomware payment. We could pay a blackmail payment. We could pay some other term payment. We just can't pay a ransomware payment. They're not they're not encrypting using ransomware, so therefore it's not a ransomware payment. Like, you can see the floodgates of litigation open.
Yes. Well, yeah, it's people. Again, I used to feel that way until I started working on it. But the first time you were inside looking at it from the victim's eyes, it makes a lot more sense when you're seeing, like, this company is going to be decimated. They're going to lose 700 people are going to lose their jobs, and 50,000 people's PAI is going to go out the door.
And business is hard enough. Like, the economy is tough enough. Like, these guys get in the mix and they throw this at you, and you have to decide, like, if they take that option away from you, you're like, then I'm just out of business.
Right.
How are you going to insure that company? Think about if you're insuring that company.
Don't get me started on
like insurance. How are you, like, think about that. Like, this company is going to go to get insurance for things, and they're going to be like, why would we insure you? Like, you can't even pay the ransom if you got hit. Right? Like, you'll be out of business. They're going to start assessing that. I mean, it's really bad.
Negotiation company that I know several negotiators at, and I talked to them on this topic, and I was asking about the insurance, and they told me that out of 49 cases last year, that 48 of the 49 that these are the ones that just were insured, didn't pay out the insurance, that they literally just will find a way to not pay, and now that they just recommend that people don't even bother, because the insurance companies are taking your money and they're not actually paying. And again, I know it's a whole other conversation, but the insurance company, they make me
It
sick.
is a really good one, and we've tried to have different people on to address that. It all kind of depends if they're coming from the insurance angle. They have a propensity to say, well, of course they'll pay if it's a valid claim, but then you get into litigate, you get into the terms of art. Well, if it says this in the policy, that means this, and then it falls in place, no coverage. Right. Here it falls in place, coverage, and it's like, okay, that's a dry discussion, and it's also something right. that most business owners don't care about. They're like, if there's a data breach, will I be covered? And they're not. Yes. They're told yes, but the answer is really no a lot of times.
Yeah,
right. I agree.
Well, then you've got the business owner, David. Remember the one guest we had? Is he sat there and literally watched the icons on his desktop turn to white squares as everything was being locked up from him, and he had no way to stop it, and said he was actually physically ill to the point that he had to run to the restroom because he knew exactly what was happening and he had no control over it.
And he didn't know how to go home and tell his wife because
that was another part.
His retirement is tied up in that. His house is tied up in that. Like, how do you do that? How do you explain? Because we bought this software and that manufacturer had a vulnerability. We lost our house, honey. Right. Like, what? Like, how do you explain that to people that aren't even in technology? I don't know how to have that conversation. Yeah. And you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to have that conversation, right?
And that's why this is such a tough.
But then you're going to tell him, oh, by the way, you can't get yourself out of it. You can't pay the ransom.
We can't pay your ransom.
Oh, because the law says no. Well, guess what? The other side of the law, the other side of the lawyers there are going to say, yeah, but here's the safe harbor for that law, right? Here's the exception to that. For every rule, there's 1,000 exceptions. So you want to pass that law to look good, pass that law, but then you're going to be able to do it. It's interesting. And I'm not necessarily a proponent of paying, but in the right circumstance, you've got to at least have the right to do it. Like, you can't take away the people's rights.
I don't think banning it is.
I don't think you can take that away.
I don't think you can.
Right? Like, you can't take that away.
Well, what about limiting it? What if there was a cap? Like, if it's
like tort reform. It's interesting. It's like tort reform. It's like the states that banned. Remember, like, the vaccines used to be an issue, and then Reagan came in and had the Vaccine Acts, and now in certain states there's tort reform. So even if you have a runaway jury, you only get like $100,000. So people are like, well, do I even litigate it? Do I not? But it's still a valid claim. That's an interesting topic.
Yeah, because then ransomware attackers are going to know what they can and can't make, and a lot of them are going to find other things.
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting?
I think that might be that might be one way to approach it.
That is really interesting.
That's a great point. Yeah.
That is interesting.
I like it.
I'll announce my Senate run.
Limiting ransom, like tort reform.
I'm going to be your campaign manager. I'm going to drive the limousine, buddy.
The problem is like tort reform and things like that can work because you're regulating companies under your jurisdiction. Here we're trying to put a cap on the value of what you can pay criminals when they threaten to do something to you. It's a little different.
Right.
So
it is a little different, but I think it's still closer to a solution than just putting a cap on it.
Yeah.
But then, and then I could see the dark web. I could see the dark web forums. So here's this package of data. You can get this, which is the maximum amount allowable under the law, right? But then you can also use this data to create fake credit cards, do this, use identity theft. Yeah. And, it's still really valuable. You can see how they'll shine up the package of the data to sell it on one of the marketplaces.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stolen data, there's so much of it out there now. A lot of it hasn't even been used yet. It's literally just sitting because it takes so long to be processed for other criminal activity. I mean, that's the only, benefit of that there's been such a high volume is that I think it's going to happen eventually, but it takes a while to get through and to do what you just said, to use that to further, criminal endeavors with that information.
Well,
so
absolutely. And Johnny, thank you again. We're not done talking to you, but we're done for today. But I'll tell you that
for this episode, there's going to be another one.
Well,
I'm always happy
well,
to come talk
I'll
to you.
tell you, that gets to the point of everybody should be freezing their credit. Like, absolutely,
Right,
under
agree.
it's free.
And have identity
Yeah,
protection
it's
because it's
free.
worth the
Yeah,
$300.
but I
It's
mean,
worth it.
freezing your credit is free, and they can't
Right.
go create new
That is
debt
free.
on your behalf.
Right.
You're not liable for anything. They can't do it unless you literally approve it at the moment. So,
Well, one thing to say is a lot of people watching this will know this, but I literally had this conversation last night with that family member, and they said to me, "But then I can't use my credit
Not
cards
true.
or my debit cards." And I'm like,
you
"No,
can
that's
use
not
all
what
of your
it
credit
means.
cards. Your FICO
Just,
score
yes,
can still go up when you
yes,
pay
it's
on
yes.
time. Marks can
You just
still go
can't create a
down when he
new
pays
loan.
late. Like, it all works out.
Right.
It just goes like this. I'm just glad I'm not a vendor of yours, but I'm just teasing, buddy. But but the thing is like everything still works. It's just no new credit can be taken
Right.
out on your
Which
name.
how often do you need that? Maybe a couple times a year at most, and
Yeah.
it takes about 20 minutes
I
to
literally
turn that
did
stuff
it.
back on.
Like, one of the
Especially in the
times, I forgot which
Especially in
store.
the
We were
house.
in some store and we bought clothes for the kids or something, and like the bill was kind of up there, and they're like, "Do you want a store credit card? You can actually get like 20% off or 10% off." And I'm like, we bought
Yeah.
so much that it actually made sense to do it, and then we were never going to use the
Right.
card, but we can't keep our credit frozen. So I literally got on the
Yeah.
app, unlocked it, they ran it, they did it, locked it back right there in line. It was that easy. So
Yeah.
I'm telling you,
Yeah.
it's a
Yes.
good way of doing it.
Or
Agreed.
you can have a 7 credit score.
Yeah, you
like
can
most.
always just do
You don't have
that.
to worry. You don't have to
Well,
worry
think
about
of
it
the
at all. You don't
fun.
have to worry about
Think of the
anything.
fun you
Yeah.
can have going from like a 750 credit score to a 7. Think of all the stuff you can get and just not pay.
How else?
Like,
How better to get back at these bad guys? Go ahead, steal my data. My credit's
yeah,
worse than yours.
Yeah.
take
But
my
experience
data.
sent me a thank you.
Yeah.
They're like, we've never seen a 7. You've set a new level of
I
lowness.
dare you to
We've
take
never
over
seen.
my identity. I got a 7
Right,
credit
right,
score. That's
right.
hilarious.
Now who's the victim?
Oh, not a that's not a disclaimer. That is not a best practice for anyone to do.
No, there's not a
This
practice.
is only used
Junkies
for
does not
television purposes
endorse
only.
having a single-digit credit
Yes,
score.
we do not condone nor approve of any single-digit credit scores. So, Johnny, before we go though, what's up next? What are you working on writing? I know you can't disclose it, but
Yeah, you said you were writing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working on the Ransomware Diaries 4. Yeah, it's going to be different. It's not LockBit. That's going to be different. Just
so
looking out for you,
LockBit's
man.
not going to be on the next one.
What's funny though is LockBit. The leader of LockBit did tell me that he did vote for the Ransomware Diaries because it was on Twitter that it got nominated for article of
For
the
Sands?
research of the year. Yeah, and so he told me
And he voted for it. That is awesome.
So,
That is. Wouldn't that be funny if he was really in Congress? Like, his real identity, he's actually, I live in New Hampshire. I'm a congressman.
right.
Because you're like, how are you voting on the Sands thing? Are you able? Were you there when I accepted the last reward? Like,
Yeah. How do you have a $200 million net?
I should invite him as my +1 and see
Yeah.
if he goes.
just be like, oh my god. So okay, so you're doing Ransomware 4. What's it about generally?
So I'm doing it. I don't want to say the group that I'm doing it on just yet, but I'm
Right.
doing it on a group. But it's expanded into some crazy things. So the original idea, obviously, is around a ransomware group, but it has crossed paths into a lot of other criminal activities that are taking place on the dark web. And it unfortunately keeps intersecting with child porn rings. So while I'm doing all of this, I've been also pushing a lot of that information over to law enforcement. But the so what of this is sort of that I think I've stumbled onto something we really haven't seen before, is where, not that this ransomware group is involved in kiddie porn, but a lot of the supporting elements that provide resources to ransomware groups are involved in some really bad things. So that money in that ecosystem does a lot more than just take, ransom extortion from companies. It feeds a lot of bad things, and that's really what I think is going to come out in this research. But I picked a really good topic because there's so much drama and crazy shit that's happening with it. So It's fun to write. It was a little crazy to research and follow and not get myself confused, but I'm having fun writing it.
So that'll be interesting because that really goes into when you think about cybercrime.
We were talking about earlier.
Yeah,
it's criminals. Criminals are going to criminal, right? That's exactly what that is. Wow. Any kind of ETA on that, Johnny?
Yeah, I'll be done with it soon, but I don't think they're going to put it out until after the holidays. Two of the things I'm also looking at down the road is eventually BlackCat or Alpha V, but I'm waiting to. I like to wait till things,
they're really interesting the way they're approaching things. Like I would have thought LockBit would have done something like that, and when I saw BlackCat, Alpha V did it, and I'm like, wow, pretty interesting. Now,
well, that's their arch nemesis.
They really are. They're frenemies, basically, right? And
well, no, they don't get along at all. They have a historic bad history together. LockBit stole their developer, things like that.
I remember you telling us about that.
Yeah. So not saying that they don't, have conversations.
I just meant they're frenemies, meaning like if there was a convention of mafia guys over in Russia, like they might be there.
It's like
they might be at different tables, but they'll be there.
Right.
They're in the same associations, maybe. So really interesting, Johnny. Well, yeah, let's plan on, please keep us posted on that. You'll definitely be back. We started doing a bi-weekly newsletter through LinkedIn and other channels, just summarizing, because in our company and the people that we deal in 4 verticals: finance, healthcare, legal, and SLED, basically education. And so what we're doing is there's so much news all over the place. People don't know what to pay attention to and what not. So we're kind of segmenting the most recent breaches or new regulations from CISA or whatever it is that's interesting within those 4 verticals. And then we're putting that out. It's called Vigilance. It's more like a digest with a little bit of insight. It's more just kind of translating it into English, into like people that don't understand cybersecurity but want to know about it because they're in the healthcare space or they're in this. That's where we're like, here's a breach, here's why it's important. Here's this, here's why this might matter. Like that type of thing. So
that sounds good.
Well, that wraps this up. Thanks for joining, everybody. Hope you got value out of digging deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today. Please don't forget to help keep this going by subscribing free to our YouTube channel at Cybercrime Junkies Podcast, and download and enjoy all of our past episodes on Apple and Spotify podcasts so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank you for joining us.